Did
I
you
don't know.
unmute me?
I did. I don't know why you were an attendee. You should have been invited.
It's probably the way I signed in.
Not following instructions, I see.
Sorry.
It's okay.
I guess you can hear me. You can see me, so we're all good.
Yeah, we're good.
Okay.
Can you all hear me? Thank you.
Hello, everyone.
Hey, Tommy.
Greetings, colleagues.
Hello, Charles. Charles, what does your mug say?
It says Union Avenue Books,
All right.
since you
Of course.
asked.
Of course it is.
And believe it or not, it's on Union Avenue.
Ah, I know it. I know it well.
Believe it or not, if you walk by, you'll see Charlie there frequently.
That's right.
Weekend guy, trying to give the appearance of being well read.
Yeah, you've got the books behind you. It's very,
Oh, yeah.
you're doing a good job selling it.
Charlie, I just got a degree that makes people think I'm well read,
Oh, wow.
but I'm not.
What's your degree?
Library science.
Oh, you
I
didn't get.
don't really read fiction, so
You didn't get that by not reading.
well, true, but I'm not as well read as people would think.
Well, it's never too late to catch up,
If I can't find time in a pandemic, when will I find time?
Boy, that's the truth.
Okay, is the gang out here?
Let's see.
We're just missing Councilwoman Parker, I believe.
Okay,
There
No,
she-
here she just signed on.
okay, awesome. Okay, and now that everyone is present, we'll go ahead and call our meeting to order. This is our city council workshop. Today's Tuesday, May the 5th. At this point, Mr. Johnson, would you please do roll call for us?
Councilwoman Fugit,
Here.
Vice Mayor McKenzie,
Here.
Councilwoman Parker,
Here.
Councilwoman Ryder,
Here.
Councilman Roberto,
Here.
Councilwoman Singh,
Here.
Councilwoman Testerman,
Here.
Councilman Thomas,
Here.
And Councilman Smith, I skipped you.
It's okay, here.
All present, ma'am.
Thank you. Okay, thank you so much, everyone, for attending. Today's topic of our workshop is going to be the Community Improvement Fund, which are better known as the 202 funds. Savannah is going to walk us through the process and talk about the importance of getting timely responses back from us as it relates to whether or not we want to support financially a certain organization that's requested 202 funds, or whether we don't want, you choose not to give funding to those. So Savannah, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Feel free, I guess, whatever council prefers, to interrupt as we go along or wait till the end for questions. I'm going to try to zip through it as quick as I can so that we have plenty of time for questions if you have them. I hope you all had the opportunity to review the packet that was sent out to you. I will be using it, I will reference it throughout the presentation. So for starters, just to give you some information about what is referred to as the 202 fund, it became effective in Knoxville in 1989. July 1st, 1989. And at that time, for accounting purposes, they assigned it a number so that they could account for it, and it was fund number 202. So that's why we call it that. But of course, the proper term for it is the Community Improvement Fund. The fund itself, of course, is regulated by several different things. And this is how I make the procedures that I use to process them, to send you requests to get documentations from organizations. And we'll go over those. If you can flip to, it should be page 4, but I think because the agenda was added to the packet, it might be page 5 in your packet. This is the section of the Tennessee Code Annotated that regulates what the fund itself can be used for and what documents we have to acquire. My understanding is that this has been in place since 1978. It has been amended multiple times, most recently in 2017. So what DCA 654-111 does is it allows legislative bodies of municipalities to appropriate funds for financial aid of nonprofit, charitable, or civic organizations. So those are 501c3s, 501c4s, and 501c6s. Of course, if it is a C4 or C6, we just have to notice it in a newspaper before it's approved before council. We don't have that requirement with the 501c3s, and that's mostly what we get requests for. The TCA also explains that the comptroller of the Treasury shall devise certain procedures. It is page 7, I believe, in your packet. This is the procedures that are provided by the state comptroller. They're really not any different than what's provided in TCA, with the exception of an option for the annual report, which we will get to when we cover documents later on. TCA also states that each legislative body will devise their own guidelines. And so the city of Knoxville has done that. And those are also in your packet on page 8. That's City Code section 2-596 through 2-603, which we will go over as well. The one thing that I want to make sure I point out in TCA is at the bottom of page 4, where it says that any nonprofit organization that desires financial assistance from its municipality shall file with the city clerk, which we keep in the office, a copy of an annual report of its business affairs and transactions that include, but is not limited to, And then it says a completed annual audit, a description of the program that serves the residents of the municipality, and the proposed use of municipal funding, municipal assistance. So the annual audit is one of the documentation items that I tend to have the most difficulty in getting the proper documentation for. So I just wanted to make it clear that that is in here, and that's why I ask for it, and that's why we're so adamant about getting the proper documentation. Moving on, we're going to go to the city code, which was on page 8 or 9. The first thing I want to point out is the eligibility for funds. It is made clear in the code. No appropriation or expenditure may be made under this division to any organization unless it is a nonprofit charitable for the general welfare of the residents of the city. No appropriations or expenditures may be made to a religious or sectarian organization. So we occasionally will get requests from churches or other overtly obvious religious organizations, in which case I will send them a letter explaining that they are not eligible for these funds for that reason. And I have included a copy of that letter on page 10 of your packet, just so you know. We explain that it's this section of the code. We say what the code says, and then explain if they have any more questions that they can contact me, and my office number and email is there. After that, in the code, it says application for funds, and this is a little bit more detailed than what the TCA has set out. Not much, but a little bit. So I'm trying to think of the best way to go through this so we're not flipping back and forth. Things that the application must include when they apply for funds is a copy of the corporate charter or other articles, a constitution, bylaw, or instrument of organization. So that's just one of those. We have to have a copy from the IRS stating that they are indeed nonprofit, so that it says they're 501c3, C4, or C6. We have to have a statement to the nature and extent of the program of the organization in which they serve the residents of the city. Typically, this comes in the form of a letter on letterhead. We have to have the proposed use of municipal funding and assistance. Again, this normally comes in the letter. Occasionally, it comes more in the form of a proposed budget. I'll accept either. A copy of the audit for the most recent fiscal year, the proposed budget for the organization, and any other information that may be required by council. So that last one, I leave up to council. I don't request anything additional unless a council member contacts me specifically and requests, can you follow up with this organization and get something? So just to go through some of the documents, page 16 of your packet. No, I'm sorry, page 11 of your packet. This is an example of the bylaws. So it just says, why the organization exists. Typically it goes over the board of directors or officers and what their duties are. I do not read it as long as it is a formal bylaws that is signed. I accept it. After that, on page 16 is an example of a charter. So this is from an older organization, as we get them from, organizations that were started last year and some that were started a long time ago. And this was from the 70s. So this is a charter. Again, it goes over what the mission statement is, why it exists, who the officers and things are. So it's been filed and signed, and that's really all I look for. If you'll go to page 22, is an example of the Articles of Incorporation. Same thing, just a different name. Page 25 is another example of a charter. And then on page 28, this is an example of an acceptable tax designation letter. So occasionally what I run into is organizations only provide me a sales tax document that says that they don't have to pay sales tax, but it doesn't say what their designation is. And so this is really what I need. This is specifically the letter that I need from the IRS that has their EIN on it, or their TIN, and it says that they are a 501c3, 4, or 6. I do keep all of this documentation on file. So typically for an organization with the bylaws and the charter and this tax designation letter, once they've submitted it the first time, that's it. They only have to resubmit it if it changes. Now, I do put on the website to provide all the documents every time, because we will have organizations that have requested funds 20 years ago, and the file may not contain this. So I want to make sure we have an up-to-date file before we proceed. The next page, page 29, is a good example of a letter. I get them in all forms. Some of them are 2 pages long, some of them are 2 sentences long, and they're all acceptable. I do like to have it on letterhead. It seems more official. But the important part is that it says why they're using the funds and how much they want, or how much they're requesting to do whatever project they're working on. If you'll move on to page 31, this is an example of what I get sometimes when people hear the term annual report. Of course, in the TCA, an annual report means an audited report, an audited financial statements. This is a good example of something that could be used as a statement of how the organization serves the citizens of the city. But this cannot be used as an annual report because it does not show audited financials. If you'll skip to page 43, this is a good example of audited financials. And I know TCA says annual report. I try to always say audited financials because I think it's more clear and kind of expresses what the code is really looking for. So this is a good example of that. Page 59 is a good example of a proposed budget. It is not a good example of audited financials. So sometimes I will get organizations that submit this to me for their audited financials or for their annual report. And I have to explain to them, this really isn't what I'm looking for. We need something different, and we'll go over what other options they have. But because they already have this, and because I already have it at that point, I will accept it as a proposed budget because it has everything there for that year. And there's no reason for them to have to do more paperwork. Page 63 is another good example of that. So for those organizations that provide that may not have, either they don't meet the threshold to where they're required to do an audit each year, or they just don't have an audit done each year, I will accept a Form 990 filed with the IRS. And some organizations don't even have enough to do that entire. They have an option called an e-postcard, which is really just a 990 electronically. And the organization logs into the IRS. They explain that they are under the $50,000 threshold and submit it. And that's it. So we accept that as well. So page 64 is an example of the full Form 990. Page 81 is an example of the e-postcard, the electronic notification. And I think this is one, I'm not sure if they can do this format anymore. I wanted to include it in case they can. Page 82 is what I see more often now. And I think that's because the IRS has moved mostly to electronic. Lynn? Oh, you're muted. Will, can you help?
Okay, here it
There
is.
we go. Okay.
Because I was doing my space bar, but it wouldn't let me do. So my question for you, when you talked about audited financial statements, and then we talked about doing something for organizations filing a tax return if they don't have receipts of over 50,000. So there's a big gap because Tennessee state law doesn't require you to do an audit for a nonprofit unless you have over $500,000 in revenue. Is that, and I'm not suggesting we change this. I'm just saying that's a real hardship and it impacts a lot of small nonprofits that may be a 501c3, all that kind of stuff, but they don't pay the expense of an audit. Is that, if I understood correctly, is that something that this council could change our requirements, or is that tied to the state and we cannot change that? Okay.
It is a state requirement.
Okay. I just think we need to be clear about that because people will think that's something that we can change, but that's a state legislative issue.
Correct. And it does say in the Tennessee Code Annotated and the state comptroller's procedures both suggest that we acquire that. So in an attempt to try and allow those smaller organizations to still be able to qualify, that's why I will accept the 990 e-postcard.
Okay. Okay.
So we will use that as a substitution for the audit.
Sort of their tax return, if you will. They're not their tax return. Okay.
Yeah.
That's good. Thank you.
Okay. So 82, page 82 is an example of that they do electronically. Page 83, I wanted to put this one in here because I had an organization that was having some difficulty, I guess, understanding the documents that we needed and how to get them all. So they actually had logged onto the IRS website and created their organization, but they hadn't actually submitted a 990. And this is an example of that. So I could not accept this. However, I was able to work with that organization and we did get their 990 postcard filed, and they printed it and returned it. So we were able to move forward. And I do want to say too, if someone's having a hard time, I spend quite a bit of time on the phone with them, and of course offer to let them come to my office so that we can get things worked out, because I know that these documents are confusing. I've even sent copies of acceptable documents to organizations to show them this is what do you have something that looks more like this, and so sometimes that's helpful and sometimes it's just not, because they don't qualify. They don't have the documents to qualify. Page 84 is another example of what some people provide to me as an annual report. This is where they've, I think they log into an electronic system with the state. This is not audited financials. This is not what we need. So I just have to follow up with them and let them know. Page 85 and 86, I do not have a ton of experience with, because I think organizations are able to meet this requirement in other ways. So this is a document that the comptroller has put together, the state comptroller. An organization can fill this out and have it certified by their CFO and present it in place of audited financials. In my experience, if an organization has a CFO, they have audited financials. So I don't have a lot of experience with it, but it is another option. Page 87 is another example of a proposed budget. So the code, nor the state code nor the city code is really specific about what a proposed budget is. It just says a proposed budget. So sometimes we get them for a year from organizations because they already have that. It already exists. So they send it to us. And sometimes we will get something like this, which is just specific to the event that they're requesting funds for. I will accept either. Page 88 is an example of the signed W-9 is signed completed, so it has to be filled in, it has to have that EIN number in there, and it has to be signed and dated. And we needed this so that we can set them up in our system as a vendor so that we can pay them once funds are appropriated. So that goes over kind of documents. Before we move on to the next sections, are there any other questions? I can't see everybody, so hopefully Will help me look for people. Okay. So moving on, based on all that information, I have put together the checklist. And I like to call it a checklist. I don't like to call it an application because I don't actually approve anything. Council does that. So I refer to it as a checklist, and that just means that these are all the documents we need to move forward. And you can see that on page 89. So we get, of course, contact information up front of who I need to talk to, phone numbers, email addresses, all that. If they do not specify in their letter the amount that they're requesting, they can put it here. So I'll reference that as well. We did make it clear on the checklist that no appropriations can be made to religious or sectarian organizations. And we asked them to certify that knowing that information, they are still eligible to receive funds. And then we have a list of the documents and my contact information so they can get in touch with me. We did recently remove the fax number from the checklist, but we do still have a fax number. So, I mean, they can drop the application off at the office, they can mail it, postal service, they can fax it, they can email it. There's a number of ways that they can get it to us. And then this part down at the bottom is for my use only. And that's where I record when I send the request out to council, and as you communicate back to me, yes, this amount of money, or no, thank you, then I record that there. So when I'm contacted by an organization, what I do is I will reference them to the checklist, which is online. If they come in, I have printed copies, or I can email that to them. I can email them a PDF or a link if they have internet access. Once they return the checklist, a completed checklist with all of the items, then I send the email to council that says this organization has requested funds. Now, based on what previous council has expected, I guess, anticipated, I only provide the letter. I only forward the letter to you all. And we can discuss that later in the meeting or at a different time if council is interested in receiving all of this other information too, so that you can make a decision on, you know, are they financially stable? Do I want to appropriate funds, or whatever reasons you may have to appropriate funds. But as of right now, I will forward the letter in an email and say they're requesting funds. So once I have received notification from all council members back, either yes with this amount or no, or can you ask them this question or can you get this information from them, then I'll do that. Once everyone has said their wishes, I will write the ordinance and submit it to the law department to be added to council's agenda. Once on the agenda, of course, it comes before you all and at a council meeting. For your approval. Sorry, before we move on to that part. So once I get everyone has said this is how much I want to appropriate, I will send out an email that says, okay, their request has been met. Or if not everyone has responded yet, but their request has been met, I will send that out and I'll just mark everybody else down as no's. Now, at that point, if someone says, oh, but I really wanted to appropriate to this, and they contact me, if a council member contacts me, I work at the will of council. So if they want me to proceed at that point, then I will. We have to contact the organization. We have to get additional documentation. But I will do so. So then it will come before council on council's agenda. Once it is approved, and after the minutes have been completed, because I use the minutes as supporting documentation to send to the finance department, I will take the minutes, I will take the AIS from the agenda, and I will do a check request. Will and I sign this documentation and send it to finance to be kept. And then I update and maintain the spreadsheet that you all see. And we have a copy in the end of our packet as well, so that everything's up to date and all balances are up to date. And then about a week after that, I'll go back into the system and double check to make sure your balances on the spreadsheet match the balances according to finance. So that's the procedure that I do. Are there any questions about that?
Savannah, I have a question, please. So I know a lot of times these the nonprofits, when they're requesting funds, it could be to support some type of outreach or event that they're having. So there's some timelines that are associated with that. What is the time frame for your process, if you will kind of put that into perspective for us?
Sure. So I have several examples. Do you want me to go over those now?
Sure, that'd be great.
Okay. So these are examples of some timelines and some issues that have come up because of those timelines. There was a homeowners association that requested funds. I got a partial request from them, so I couldn't get all of the required documentation, but we started the process on October 3rd, 2018. We finally got all of the documentation we needed, and the payment request was sent to finance December 17th, 2019. So this took over a year. Now, of course, in that situation, it was the organization and we were trying to get documentation. But you know, I mean, that it can take a while. And that's why I wait until I have all the documents before I send them to council, because if it's on June 30th at the end of a fiscal year, and a member of council has appropriated $500, but we don't have all the documentation, we can't process that. And so then they would just lose that $500. So that's why I try to wait to make sure we're ready to process before appropriations are provided. There was another nonprofit that was having a festival that requested funds on June 30th, 2019. They provided all the documentation, and I communicated that to council that same day, June 30th, and then a second time on August 27th. But due to a lack of or a delay in responses, we were not able to cut that check until February 25th, 2020. Now, this may have been an issue because their event was in August. Now, it worked out that they were able to still use those funds to cover costs that they had with that event. But if they had already paid off all of their expenses, we would have had to have done an ordinance to repeal and had them send the check back and done more paperwork to get them another request. And it could have been a huge ordeal. In this situation, it was not. There was another organization that we received a request from January 28th of this year. The request, this is an example of where the request was fulfilled. So I sent that notification to council March 19th. However, after that, there were council members that responded wanting to still appropriate funds above and beyond what their request was. So there was a delay because I had to contact the organization again. The organization has to resubmit their documents because we basically use the amount that they request as an invoice. So we can't pay any more than what they request. So they had to do the additional documentation. We were able to get it processed. I think they're currently still waiting on their check, but as of last week, it was sent out. So, so that was from January, the end of January to the end of April.
Savannah,
Yes.
I have a quick question. Is it possible, and I think it would be helpful to me when you put out ask to us that there's a deadline that we have to reply to you by.
Okay. That's
Because sometimes I don't reply because I'm holding out because I'm expecting other things. And then if those things don't pan out, I'm willing to give to a particular organization, but I tend to hold back thinking that I'm going to get an ask or a pending ask from someone else that I had funding in mind for. So if I,
sure.
I think if, obviously some of us has been getting these asks for longer than others. In my experience, sometimes the ask comes to us multiple times. And I think if there's a finite, like you got to tell me, in 14 days or whatever, 3 weeks, this is your deadline. This is your date. You got to tell me.
Yeah. So there are some other suggestions that I had as well, as ways that we can kind of move forward with this. Ultimately, it's council's will. So whatever council wants me to do, that's definitely what I'll do. And that is definitely an option. Councilwoman Fugit?
Thank you. I guess for me, I'm new to this, but I have no idea how many requests we're going to get. I mean, I think like every other granting agency, everybody else that does grants, there's a deadline and they accept grants maybe 3 or 4 times a year. They all come in and then you can weigh them. I think what's hard for me about this is I have no idea what's coming next, if and when they're coming. And so I could wind up with some left over because there's some stuff I would have funded sooner had I known that that was all that was going to come in. So this having a finite amount of money to use in a 12-month period and requests coming in every month is a little confusing for me. That's just me, but it would help me if we told the community we accept grant applications 4 times a year. I don't know. That's just Lynn. I'll roll with the flow and I'll figure this out if we're not going to change, but it's a struggle for me personally.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I would definitely, I think at the end of this, I had left an opportunity for us to discuss. I think it would definitely be helpful for me to have some clear guidelines from council as to what is expected on things like that, on a deadline, and how to move forward. Absolutely. Another organization, and this is not a reoccurring problem. However, I did want to let you all know of it. So there was an organization that had requested funds in December. And this is an organization that always provides a completed checklist to me the first time. And so I had sent the information out. It was completed and sent to finance in early February. However, their event was in May of this year. So of course, due to COVID-19 and all of the circumstances right now, they had to change their event. Now, the funds, the monies are supposed to be spent the way the ordinance says they are. And the ordinance had said that it was to be specifically used for this event. So you'll be seeing this before you next council meeting. In this circumstance, we're just going to do another ordinance explaining that that's what happened, that I've communicated to the council members that appropriated, and they were willing to still allow them to use the funds for their other event. We just have to do an ordinance that says that that's okay. So that's an unusual circumstance. I'm hoping that we don't have any more of those. I've been trying to follow up with organizations before an item comes before council to ask if their event was still going to happen. But of course, we don't know at this point. So, and then this last example is just an example of how quickly we can move forward. So I received a completed request from the organization and communicated to the council member that appropriated the full amount. And we had it on council's agenda and approved and sent to finance to have the check cut by April 21st. So it was just just 2 weeks. So, you know, if everything goes smoothly, we can get it done really quick. We just all have to be on our toes. So those are some examples of things that happen that can delay or expedite the request. Does that answer questions that you had, Vice Mayor McKenzie?
It did, and I think I don't know about anybody else, but I'm shocked that there are some examples where it's taken an organization close to a year or months or after the need was requested for whatever they were going to use the funds for. I think that's not acceptable. There are some organizations that are depending upon that funding to be successful in whatever that they're trying to do. So I would like to hear some additional suggestions and recommendations on how we can be more efficient as a council in getting these requests turned around more quickly than that. If we decide to continue on the path that we're on, I think Councilwoman Ryder's recommendation that in the subject line, when you send it out, you have what the deadline is. And I don't think it should be any more than 30 days for them to be able to get the funding that we approve to them expeditiously. Unless you're a really large organization, some of them probably can't have the scope of whatever type of event they're trying to have without the funding they request from us. In addition to that, I think that Councilwoman Fugit is absolutely correct. We have a limited amount of money that we are afforded to distribute to organizations in our community and across the city that are doing good work. But when you're out, you're out. And sometimes, you know, you can say, man, these are some great causes, but I think I've heard this other organization may be doing something later in the year and I want to support that. And so I think we need to consider, what does that look like? You know, do we want to look at trying to making a change that says that we have an open time frame that we accept 202 fund applications for the year, for that fiscal year? And then we know how we are going to appropriate the $10,000 that we're allotted during that calendar year, that budget year rather. So I'd like to open it up for discussion and conversation.
Just,
Say,
Councilwoman, you get,
go ahead,
I
Savannah.
was just gonna say, in your packet, page 117 is an example of a previous, it's a previous year spreadsheet for the fund. And this is an example of the type of requests that we had received for a full year, and what appropriations were made. I don't know if that helps in making any of those decisions, but I wanted to definitely make it available for you. We have several years in the office that I can always make available to you as well. It was just easier to do just one in the packet, but it's there.
Savannah, I know that we get a very wide range of requests from just a few dollars to all the way up to the 10,000. Can we have a different process, more complicated process, the more money? And if it's a small amount, maybe make it simpler, maybe that would speed up things.
I don't want to sound like a broken record, but of course it's council's discretion. So if that's the will of council, then that's what I'll do. However, I will caution you that we do still have to stay compliant. So as long as it's within the state regulation and city code, then, whatever council wishes is what I will do.
and Councilwoman Fugit, please. Go ahead.
Thank you. Vice Mayor, I wonder if there would be benefit, and if we're going to try this out, taking applications twice a year, the first half, because a lot of organizations don't know in July what they're going to want to do in February. But if we wanted to try twice a year, I don't think we can do it a whole year in advance. I don't even mind 4 times a year. I just want some deadlines that I then know I have, so that in my mind, I could say, got $100 a quarter, or I've got $5,000, if you will, in my school brain. Or I can hold all mine because I might know there's something big coming. I don't know. You pros that have been doing this for a couple of years, tell us how it works, because that's been my, George left me half of his, but I've had no idea what might be coming this next half of the year.
All right. Councilwoman Parker, and then we'll go to Councilwoman Ryder.
I was just going to recommend some sort of hybrid system where the organizations can still apply year round, but we designate 4 of our council meetings per year to vote on it. And, we could even leave. This doesn't solve the problem of folks who wait for a long time for a decision, but folks could stay in the pool. And then, within one budget year, whatever we're able to finalize before each designated meeting is what gets finalized. But we, as a council, at least know that there's not going to be something coming forward that we're not anticipating, and that those decisions are going to be made quarterly at certain designated meetings. I don't know if that helps, but might help a little.
Yeah, good suggestion. Thank you. Councilwoman Ryder.
Well, I just was, I'll make sure. Okay. So maybe we could do it where we do beer board the last meeting of the whatever month, that's once a month. And maybe we vote on these on consent, so it's not like a discussion or anything. Maybe it's the 202's deadline is however long it takes you to do all the paperwork and whatever's ready is prior to that first meeting. So the non-beer board meeting, it's just a different arbitrary deadline. The only hesitation I would have to limiting them to like twice a year or even 4 times a year versus once a month, like a revolving deadline, is you have some small organizations that might not be that organized with their deadlines, and they come up with a need. And if we limit it so much that they never get the opportunity, or the opportunity passes them by. My only ask was that, Savannah, I don't want to waste your time because I don't reply to your request. And maybe that's just, I could do better. Instead of not answering, sometimes I've answered you and you come back around and you say, did you make up your mind? Did you change your mind? I know you were still pending a decision on this. I don't want you to have to invest a lot of time asking me about it. If you say to me, if you want to give to this, the date is this, and that's it. And I'll know if I'm going to give, I got to give you that date. And I've done that with you on another thing to finish out my funds for this year. I said, I'm going to do this amount. No, I can't even remember. I lost my train of thought, but yeah, anyways, I'll leave that thought there. For anybody else though, in terms of what's coming, I of course find it helpful to look at what people prior have funded. Being involved in my neighborhood, I had experience with what our previous council person funded. He had a particular philosophy. We all have our philosophy of how we're going to spend the funds. So, you know, but looking at what people before me, and I would look at the other districts and the other council members to see how they spent it. Oh, now the only other thing I'll add to that, Savannah, I also wonder what the rest of council thinks when I'm looking at the website for community improvement funds here. It actually might be really interesting to have a history or information listed there, or even a spreadsheet of what's been funded. There's no information here unless you go searching through the agendas to see what's funded. So I think for, you know, public information and transparency, that would be nice for the public.
Sure.
Okay. Thank you. And Councilwoman Fugit, you had asked those of us who've been on council how we've done it in the past. And so even though we are the seniors by default, we're still new as well. But I think basically most of us have actually tried to spread our funds out. However, I've seen some of the past council members give, at 1 year I saw a council member give the entire amount to one organization that they were very passionate about, or I've seen them just, and Savannah, you probably have some examples as well, where they've given it the $10,000, they've divided it between 2 or either 3 organizations they were very passionate about. Those of us who've remained on council, it appears that we have spread our money out, tried to do so to touch as many organizations as possible. That does not mean we're always able to meet their requests per se, because Savannah, you do have some that we aren't able to fulfill the entire request. And so you just go ahead and process what has been approved by that particular council member, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And I do have some examples if you'd like me to go over those real quick.
Council, would you guys like to hear some of the ones where people have given their full amount or large donations to? You can just briefly maybe.
Vice Mayor,
Yes.
Mr. Frost has been trying to seek recognition.
Oh, I don't see him. Go right ahead, Mr. Frost.
Thank you. Getting back to the quarterly plan, like Councilwoman Parker mentioned, a couple of thoughts on that. They have to end with the city's fiscal year, so those funds would not then be returned to the general fund. But also listening to what Savannah was saying about organizations that sometimes are slow to get back, like the one in the case of a year. Maybe an idea could be is you've applied for 1 quarter. If you don't get your required paperwork in that quarter, you're given 1 quarter's grace. Then if you don't have your paperwork in by the end of that quarter, then you're automatically dropped. So she wouldn't have to keep trying to run down an organization to do what they're supposed to do to receive the funds. Just a thought.
Yeah. I think that's a good thought, because if I'm an organization that's requesting funds, the onus should be on me. And if I really want to get the funds, I should work expeditiously to do my part. I don't think that that's probably the majority of what you're seeing as the holdup. I think the majority of the holdup is been getting responses back from us. And I know I'm guilty of it myself in the past, and definitely realize that I have got to do better moving forward. So, but thank you, Mr. Frost. Councilwoman Fugit.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. I think part of my concern, this is a learning thing. We'll roll with it. But when you're doing at large, you're really looking at trying to look all across the city. And so that makes it a little more challenging, because I don't want to favor one district over the other and try to, because there are a lot of great things. So I'm looking at more citywide things, organizations that maybe do work across the city. And that's the only reason I like the idea of having some idea of what's coming for the whole. We'll just make it work.
Yeah.
I can give a fast answer, but I think what's going to happen is I will wind up saying no to a lot of things because I don't know what's coming.
Right. And thank you for pointing that out, because I would think that that is more challenging for at-large representatives. As a 6th district representative, and I know others, other council members as well, we give to organizations outside of our districts as well. So, but for you guys,
I know.
You guys have to blanket pretty much. You want to be even keel on that as well. So, so council members, I think the overarching message is when we get those requests, we need to make a decision and get those turned back in timely. So do we want to start there and then let's see how it goes for maybe a couple of months? Savannah, if you're still seeing that there's a lot of lag time with us, then maybe we sit back down and we have another conversation about, we're going to have to go to plan B.
Absolutely.
What does plan B look like?
I would like to clarify, do we want to put a deadline on those responses, you know, a 14-day or a 30-day deadline, or do we just want to kind of see how responses come in?
No, I think that we've seen before, and they haven't been because everyone's busy. And so when we see emails and we say, okay, I'll get back to that one, if it has a deadline in the subject line, that's going to get our attention, and that's going to make us make a decision sooner rather than later. Councilwoman Fugit.
Thank you. Could we get like a month's worth at one time and know that we've got X number of days? I think what happens is when you get one week and another couple of weeks later, it gets kind of lost in the shuffle. But
absolutely. I guess, is there a certain time of month that would be better? Like the first of the month, the middle of the month? Okay, yeah, I can do that.
Councilwoman Singh.
Lynn, although I like that idea, I think it starts us off with the delay right away. If someone applied in the beginning of the month and we don't get it until the end of the month, they're already 4 weeks behind. So I don't want to set it up where we're already running behind.
Any other conversation?
I'm not going to die on that hill. I'm fine with that's not a hill to die on, folks. It's just a suggestion.
So sounds like the majority of us are in agreement. Let's continue in the path that we're on now. But Savannah, moving forward, we'll put a deadline that we have to have a response back. Savannah, I think if we can get a consensus, if we do not respond by that deadline, then you're going to close it out with whatever amount has been appropriated by the council members that respond.
Okay.
Council, are you okay? Is everyone, if anyone takes issue with that approach, please speak up.
No, I think that's a good idea, and we've had a good conversation. I don't know that we've come up with the correct solution, but I know that a good step forward would be just, Savannah, simply give us a deadline. I know that would prompt me a lot better, and we can try that for a while and see what kind of improvement that is, and then maybe revisit this this subject later on, about whether we want to have them to come in periodically or not. But I think there is a consensus. Let's just have Savannah to send us a deadline that will prompt us, and then we can kind of take it from there, see how that works.
Could I ask one other piece of information in addition to the deadline? Like, and this is adding to the load. But like the day before the deadline, if we could know how much remains, I'm trying to figure out how we don't all send in $1,000 at the deadline, and then somebody gets $10,000 or $9,000.
I can absolutely do that. However, if I do it early in the morning or at lunch, I mean, there's still going to be that possibility. I can, and we can see how it goes and see if we can come up with some other kind of solution. But that's definitely a thought. Yeah.
So recommendation, and I think that's an excellent idea, Councilwoman Parker. Why don't we do this? Let's have a 14-day deadline. After that 14-day, on that 14th day, before the close of the day, Savannah, or maybe the following moment, the following morning, can you send out to all council members the amount of funding that was approved for that organization? It's kind of that last call.
Okay.
So that's our grace period.
And then responses need to be by close of business that day.
Right. And after that, that's it. So with that said, Councilwoman Parker, on the 14th, that's our deadline. Everyone says what they're going to appropriate. And then the following day, she will send out how much was allotted. So if I request $1,000, and on the 15th, which is the day after, Savannah says this organization was only appropriated $400 by council members. Then at that point, you can say, if you only gave $100, you want to bump yours up, or if you didn't get an opportunity to respond, then you make a decision from there. Is that fair? Does that make sense? We're not saying we want everybody to wait to the last minute, but that could be a strategy that depending on the organization. So
we need a running leaderboard so we can keep track.
That's what it feels like. Yeah. But puts more work on you, Savannah, and puts a little pressure on us. But at the end of the day, I think our goal is that we need to turn these around and get these organizations their funding more timely.
Yeah, Gwen, I think that's a good suggestion there. That gives some guidance about who's appropriated what and how much each individual group has received. And if we need to bump it up, we say this is a worthy cause and they're not getting enough, then that gives us an opportunity to do that before our deadline. Okay.
Right. Yeah. Councilwoman, thank you, Council Member Thomas. Councilwoman Singh.
Thank you. Should we address giving the organization a deadline to get the paperwork in? Would that make things more organized as well? Just asking.
I mean, that would absolutely make things more organized on my end, but I will defer to council's wishes.
Councilwoman Fugit.
Thank you. I think it's reasonable to give someone who's asking for a grant a deadline that all their documentation needs to be in. I don't know what it is, but it sounds to me like we've got problems on both ends. Organization trying to get all their stuff in, which then creates an emergency on our part to get something funded before their event. So I don't know what the deadline should be, but I would say that they need to at least have everything in a minimum of 30 days before the event. Because I don't know how you could turn a check around any faster than 30 days. You might say 45, but I think there needs to be a reasonable expectation from their point of view that we can't turn that fast.
Agree.
Sorry.
Just go ahead, Savannah.
So this is not a monthly application deadline or a quarterly application deadline. This is just it needs to be 30 to 45 days before your event. Do we want to also say you've sent in your packet and there's documents missing and I contact them? Is there going to be a deadline for the follow-up? So after I contact the organization and say, I still need this document, you have 2 weeks to provide it, or 3 weeks to provide it, or no. I mean,
Yeah, I think that I would say 2 weeks. For those of you who work nonprofits, would 2 weeks give you or your staff, your point person, enough time to get the necessary documentation back in?
Yes, if you have it. And so I think the point of being clear on the front end of what you need, and that you need a completed package 30 days before the event, completed package. Because if they don't have a complete package 30 days before the event, we're not going to be able to get them funded before their event anyway. Because then we have 14 days to decide.
Right.
okay.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I think it helps because I've gotten, I'm sure all of us have, but I've been contacted by community members who, think that they can make a request and then at next Tuesday city council meeting, it's going to be finalized. So the more, that clarity they can get about the process, I think it's better.
Managing expectations is always a good thing.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's so true. And I also want to take a moment and acknowledge Savannah, because Savannah, I know that you have personally worked with a couple of organizations in my district that were struggling to get information and to understand the process, where you have actually met with them, you've been on phone calls with them. And so I do want to thank you for going above and beyond in that aspect. But again, we want to be respectful of your time, everyone's time. The second piece of that, so there's always the but in the event that there's an organization who does not get their information turned in during the timeline, I think that all council members, if you could at least send us an email letting us know that the organization will be, their application is going to be removed because of they didn't meet the deadline. Because 9 times out of 10, someone's going to contact one of us and say, hey, I'm being mistreated because now I'm not eligible to get the funding for my event.
Sure.
We already have the information. So if you can, so it takes all of us working together.
Absolutely.
I think that would be
Would
very
you
helpful.
like me to follow up with the organization with a letter similar to the one that I provide for religious organizations? I can tweak that and provide a letter to them saying, I'm sorry your application was removed because you did not meet all the
Absolutely.
qualifications. Okay.
Yeah, I think that would be great. Thank you.
Sure.
It's a great idea. Okay, good dialogue. Any other further discussion or questions or comments?
Thank
Okay.
you all for your time.
Yeah.
These are good changes, Savannah. I'm really grateful for you staying on top of everything on both sides of the coin. It means a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. This was a very informative workshop. So thank you very much, Savannah. So very quickly, before I think I give everyone a couple of minutes back before the council meeting, I've spoken with a couple of you guys, but for those of you that I have not had an opportunity to talk to, we are looking to have our city council retreat on Saturday, July the 18th. And so I just want to make sure that that date works for everyone. I am hopeful that by July the 18th, we will have lifted restrictions on the social distancing to some degree. So let's say worst case scenario is social distancing then goes up to having 20 people in a group. We are looking to have the city council retreat at the United Way building in the large room downstairs. So we will still have a lot of space between all of us. So we are not going to be sitting very closely to each other. But is there anyone on the call that is not available on Saturday, July the 18th? Because it's imperative that we have 100% attendance because of what we are trying to achieve with our team building, et cetera. And you can anticipate 8:30 to at least 3:30. We may close out a little bit sooner, but I would block out till 3:30 on that Saturday. Is there anyone on the call that is not able to commit to Saturday, July the 18th?
I don't know yet. I'll look at my calendar.
Okay, could you let me know by tomorrow?
Yeah, I will. I can
Okay.
let you know if I walk across the room and look at it.
Well, all right, just text me then. Okay, sounds good. Thank you, everyone. And then the next thing, again, I want to remind everyone, I know it's on our calendars, but the budget hearings, May the 14th, 8:30 to possibly 6, because public forum starts at 5 o'clock. So I would anticipate us being well rested for that day, because that's going to be a lot of information, a lot of numbers. Subsequently, May the 15th will be our second day of the budget retreat, starting at 8:30. Public forum starts at 2 o'clock. So again, just because public forum starts at 2 does not mean we end at 2. So again, I encourage everyone to please be well rested so we can have great attention during these proceedings, because these are very, very important hearings that we're going to be going through for the budget. Those are the only things that I wanted to remind everyone of at this point. Is there any further discussion or comments before we close out and have a couple more minutes before our city council meeting? And did the birds want to speak? Okay. Hearing no other questions or comments or concerns, the meeting is now adjourned at 5:38, and I will see everyone at 6 p.m. Thank you.